Turkish Creek,
Okay.
and it was difficult. It was difficult. So I'm sorry that we're in this position where we're doing this again. But
I think we need to do minutes first, though, Biz.
yeah, Jeremy, why don't you go ahead since my
Okay.
yeah.
So, I'll entertain a motion to, approve the minutes as presented, or if there's any revisions or amendments. I don't
I'll
see
make a
anything.
motion. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion?
No.
I don't see anything wrong. Granted, October 2020, I get, it's been a while. I've slept since then. But, the one from call a vote, is there, so do we have ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Okay, any nays? Good. So I think that's good.
And Madam Chair, I know that the packet has some new things in it from, since last time, and I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to immediately following the minutes, there's some summary materials that were presented to the commissioners, including photographs, and then the page immediately after that, which at the top says regular session minutes, is a summary of the discussion by the commissioners and Jen and Max and Jeremy's letter. And I thought maybe it would be a good place to start your discussion is sort of responding, because this is sort of where the request has been formalized by the commissioners, and that capturing that discussion that you all had, you were represented by board members at the commission meeting. So they had asked you all to meet and follow up, so I thought this might be a good place to start.
I mean, I wasn't, unfortunately, I'm just swamped at work. I wasn't able to make it during the day. But what was, and we talked about this at the November meeting, what was their thoughts on the immediate need to weatherize the building, seal it off with, we can have county employees or have a local contractor go out there and seal everything off from the public? How did they take that? That's a relatively low-cost item that can be done immediately.
Jeremy, there was a bit of a pushback on that. I had suggested using like a chain link fence system that would be right up against the base of the
Okay.
building. And I don't know, I'm not sure it was taken very well. I'm trying to think of the other gentleman that was there.
Who was the?
Public Works Director?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's certainly a concern that the entire building may well come down. There's a concern that in high winds, the building may topple, right? It has no foundation. It's literally sitting on a couple of I-beams. So I think the plan was to erect fencing at a further perimeter from the building. So if the building were to come down, there would be fall area. So I did provide the fencing company that we use for another project to Mike and Jill, and I believe they're gonna put up a perimeter fence, just not next to the building, to create a fall zone.
well,
Yeah. And
there was then discussion about that being a problem because there were so many vehicles that were maneuvering
Yeah.
in the streets.
Yeah, those parking spots are premium. I mean, I'm a user. I put my kayak in there once or twice a month, so it is certainly at a premium in the summer months. But, I mean, if they want to put a fence up 8 foot or something like that from the building,
Well, when Max brought it up, Max, correct me if I'm off here, we talked about putting up against the building because whether it's the perimeter or it's up against the building, if the building falls, the fence is going anyway. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
which way it falls, it's gonna destroy a fence. And the purpose of the commissioners wanting to make sure that there was some structure to keep people from getting in the building. It was more about
Right.
getting in the building than the structure being safe, because it's not. So, Max, does that summarize that properly? Your suggestion was whether it's a weather fence or a chain link fence, it was to put it right up against it, because if it comes down, the fence isn't staying anyway.
can they, Max, you might know better than I can. Can they put a chain link fence along with, like nail tarp or something like that too, just to keep some of the elements out of there? Because, I mean,
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
so I
You
think,
can integrate that.
I mean, I think for an immediate thing, I think that's something very reasonable. In my view, that's a very reasonable ask to do immediately. And that buys you a little bit of time.
I
Be-
thought,
in-
I
in
thought
the
that
end-
Commissioner Price even put an amount on it and okayed this.
Right, I was just
He
gonna
did?
say,
Okay.
the way the conversation concluded, it says,
I haven't talked to,
they, commissioners unanimously approve the county in the near future to contract with a fencing company the county is using for the property at Daisy Drive to put a fence up against the building and post warning signs on the property, as you said, Penny, and the cost should not exceed $4,500, and contingency funds are to be used. So
Okay.
they did, in the end, decide for
okay. Can,
against the building, whatever that sort of.
can we also have TARP included in that as well? Some sort of TARP?
Bill, this is Mike Molds.
Hey, Mike.
Here we- Hey, sorry I was late. I had to get home. My other meeting ran late. Just to let the group know, the fence has been installed. It's up against the building. They wanted to address the primary reliability of not having people going in the building.
Right.
But so that's already been done. It's a
Oh,
rented
good.
fence.
Oh, great.
So, but as far as putting any tarps or anything like that, the concern there is I wouldn't want to put anybody on that roof.
This was against actually against the fence, wasn't it? Jeremy, that's-
Well, the fence is against the building.
okay.
Okay.
Well, there was also
Well,
discussion
we
about.
could use a high lift down there, but there is a cost incurred with that. So somebody doesn't necessarily, if we could access the building with a high lift, we could potentially get a tarp up there without someone being endangered by doing so. Do you think that's even an option?
You're trying to put a tarp up, you got to have literally someone on both sides trying to pull it up. It's like pulling up the comforter on a bed kind of thing.
Yeah,
And it'd be difficult to do that. Plus, then the problem is wind damage. It gets windy down there.
it
Um,
does.
So I think probably what happened, whatever you tie it down with on the building would end up, when the wind would come, probably pull off what's on the building along with the tarp.
Mm. Yeah, tarps are never really great long-term solutions, but this one is, so dire. Okay, thank you.
And sort of in the center of that summary, Commissioner Fithian asked members of the HPC to reach out to Wayne Gilchrist for resources and research grants that may be available and present their findings at a later meeting. So
Well, I
that's
already
sort of
did
the
that.
ask.
I already did that.
Okay.
So that was what I submitted as part of this. I mean, those are the available grants that I'm aware of. And, unless, the only other thing that I would add to what I already provide.
Sending that to everybody who's listening. So if you're
Yeah.
on the call, I'm emailing you the document that Jeremy's referring to.
Yeah, and I had already sent it to you all.
Yeah.
But the only other thing that I would add, in addition to the well, actually, no, it was already in there, so congressional earmarks was already included. I work in Delaware, Kent County Levy Court, obtained $800,000 to renovate the Brecknock Mansion at Brecknock County Park. Between, just north of Camden. I mean, Milton Theater got $150,000 to renovate, for downtown Milton, and this was all done by a congressional earmark. So include those in there, but we do have hard deadlines.
And the one, for the sake of saying so, Jeremy, number one requires easements. So the county would have to sign off on an easement if it were to go after number one. The rest of them, I don't think have any easements attached.
I don't believe, well, if you were to get a Paul Brune, if you were to get a Paul Brune grant, they also require an easement to be put on the property. I was at the National Main Street Conference a week and a half ago, and I did not get a chance to speak with Nikki Van from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, but, Bardish True is due June the 15th, and Maryland Historical Trust, their capital grant program is due May the 1st. Both of those, provide both capital and planning funding that can be utilized for this. Preservation Maryland is very hit and miss. I mean, I don't know if they're not the most reliable of sources. But you know, number one and number three are very good programs that can provide grant funding for this. You know, a regional entity, you know, if you were to have Stories of the Chesapeake apply for a Paul Brune this coming fall, you know, I did it in Delaware, and we're gonna be doing sub-grants where, you know, you can apply, you know, so that buildings could get $50,000 to $100,000 of grant funding, you know, but, you know, so I think these are unless anybody has any additions, I think these are more or less, unless, the only additional one, but I think it's already too late, we're already too far in the session, is, you know, you have the ability through the state bond bill, you have the ability to ask Jay Jacobs to put it in the state bond bill for an allocation for a public facility just like this. And I know the county has done that in the past, and as a matter of fact, they may have obtained funds in the past utilizing state bond bill. It's pretty common for a public facility like this. But I think it's too late in the session. I don't think you can get anything.
Already past crossover.
Yeah, so you're already past crossover, so I don't think you're gonna get it.
Right. In addition, the commissioners wanted you all to present a plan within 30 days. So you would have to get on the agenda for one of the meetings and do that, and then they want to take a look at what that,
My take on it, and I want to refer to
Sure.
Jen and Max, because you were really engaging the commission, was that they, you know, grants was part of it, but I think they also wanted to look at some alternative ideas, sort of like, you know, a pavilion, and, you know, something preserving the memory of what that was there and having some, you know, interactive tool there.
Yeah, Max, and jump in here. Commissioner Fithian was specifically asking about opportunities to salvage parts of the building and then use it to rebuild a pavilion in honor of the building and make it accessible for the community. And that was one theme that he was going back to in any capacity that we have to make a recommendation towards something like that, if the building itself is deemed
Yeah.
not
It
retrievable.
would also have some sort of display and maybe even a model of the site that would show how the how the building was used during its heyday. It could be very educational from that standpoint.
I mean, I would, from my perspective on the commission, my recommendation would be is that's the absolute last resort, in terms of for us to be able to present a recommendation, you know, do they have funds that we would be able to contract with an architect to be able to do an up-to-date assessment or anything?
I think so.
So, I mean, if their decision is to demolish the building, then they need to tell us that, because, I mean, I don't know what you're expecting us to do.
I agree.
Because, I mean, if you're not gonna give us money to be able to do a plan, or to be able to provide, to be able to go out and get grant funding, which there are grant opportunities in the very near future that can be obtained, then it's a moot point.
I think.
Jeremy, I think
and- I'm sorry, go ahead.
what happens next? You know, what suppose it does get restored? Where does it go from there? And it would be a stretch for us to figure that out.
Well, I think doing an RFP, you know, once the baseline stabilization is completed, doing an RFP to find a tenant, not terribly different than what the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy did with Knox Folly, when Knox Folly was utilized by the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy when Wayne Gilchrist worked out of there doing environmental education. You know, you have the individual, you know, that had already contacted us, and I agree with you that it's not fair to engage with him without doing a formal RFP, but I would like us to pursue that if we're given a timeline that we can come up with a plan to stabilize the building.
Well, and Jen and Max, I really want to
The problem-
defer to you, but I feel like commissioners wanted options, right? We could do grants, we could do an RFP, we could do a building memorializing, we could, like, a sort of a, you know, that you would come back, it's only 30 days, you know, they're not expecting a final thing,
Right.
but that you would have sort of a menu for them to consider and think about. That's how I felt it was. I don't
Okay.
know how you all felt, yeah.
It was. I think the only thing that we want to make sure we don't do is we provide options, knowing full well that there is no option on the table besides the one that was presented. So I think from a preservation standpoint,
Which option was that? Are you talking about the gentleman who contacted us?
no, the demolition.
Oh, the demolition,
I
yeah.
think being frank, like you said, about
Yeah.
if in the end, there's going to be no funds to actually go forward and no premise by which we could save the
Yeah.
building, if the demolition is ultimately in the background period, then we can present solutions to what a restoration would look like. But if it's.
I don't know how we're going to be able to offer a solution that, you know, other than options, like we're talking about, or, you know, doing an RFP, getting grants and doing so. How are we going to be able to actually tell the commissioners that, you know, this is going to be the way forward? Because we don't have any idea what it's going to cost to stabilize this building. We really don't have an idea. I mean, we may be able
And-
to take a decent guess at it, but I think we have to assume the demolition is always in the back of their minds, because why wouldn't it be? You know,
So-
that's why they have us to present a
So-
different perspective, right?
So if we can get a buy-in from them to contract with an architect to take, I don't know, if we can find one who'll do it within 30 days in terms of what needs to be done to the building, you know, in terms of a structural assessment, and what the cost would be to do that structural assessment.
So I can't contract with an architect within 30 days. I won't be able to do that.
Yeah, it would take too long.
I don't know if it has to be an architect. It could be somebody else. It could be an incredibly competent builder, just somebody who
Sure.
can give us a ballpark,
Right.
so that we can look at the commissioners and tell them, listen, we've actually spoken with X person. And in our view, while this is not a final number by any stretch, we have confidence that, you know, this is what it's going to take to do this building, at least to stabilize it, and perhaps X amount of dollars more to repurpose it, but to restore it. But restoring it also involves use. And that's
Yeah.
going to be where the RFP comes in.
Right, and I mean, I view it as being, it's a two-part, it would be
Yeah.
any restoration, in my view, would be two parts. I mean, one would be stabilization of the building and the exterior to keep the elements from coming in, and so that it's not gonna fall down. You know, and then the interior fit out, you know, would come after you do an RFP. If you went that route, you would do an RFP, and if somebody was selected, what the interior of the building and the final fit out of that building would be part two, but,
If I can just sort of muse a
Okay.
little, and again, I'm just sort of intuiting, but,
Yeah.
you know, the RFP, in order to have an RFP, we need a budget item, right? So
Right.
we need to have some round ballpark figure of what we might spend. And this is budget time, right? Commissioners are getting ready to go
Sure.
into budget discussions. And I think the reason it was the 30 days was just to get you all do this work all the time, you have experience, sort of, you know, you all can say, hey, you know, all things being equal, a project that would stabilize the whole building, you know, you might want to set aside a budget for this year for the first stage of X. For a project to do a memorial site, you might want to put aside this much money for the first year to do Y. To do something with a tenant and a refit and an RFP, you might want to put enough money away this year to do Z. So they got a couple of options, a couple of ballpark figures. They can pick one and put some money in a budget to do something. But I think for them, right, you all have the expertise. They don't even know what the somethings are or what the rough ballpark is. If you can provide those pieces, then they can at least put some money aside to do one of those things, and then, you know, we've got a year to work on it. And the idea being, I think, you know, if you have some notion of what an overall cost might be, right? So like completely redoing the building from scratch, you'd need X amount of money to do construction this year, and think about the full project might be, you know, I think you talked about $500,000 last time. That's a nice, you know, that's something to work with, because again, budget is just, we're gonna put a pin in it, we're gonna put
Right.
some money aside for it, and that's, I think that's where we are.
okay. Are you all able to answer the question in terms of, for public open space money, what would we, because for us to be able to think about a plan forward, I think we, as a commission, I would need to know what does the county have in those funds available that could potentially be used towards.
Right, I can't, I don't know what we have in public open space money.
Okay.
I don't normally.
Sure, I
tap
understand,
that. Yeah.
sure.
But again, I think this is a sort of a rough budget discussion, so,
Okay.
if that's helpful. And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, go ahead, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
I apologize. It's hard to know where to chime in when you're on the phone.
I know.
I'm sorry, I can't see you, Bill. I understand what you're saying. I do want to reemphasize what Jeremy was saying before, which is in terms of making recommendations, I sort of fear making a recommendation about what it would cost to make it a memorial site, because undoubtedly it's going to be a lot less than what it will cost to restore or repurpose the structure. And I don't want them to take that really as an option. I don't want to be the first one to put that on the table. I don't really think that we should go forward with that in mind. I think we should go forward with the idea that we're going to try and save this historic space, and we're going to try and give it a job, and not just default to taking it apart and creating something else out of it. I think once we offer that on the table, that's going to be the way it goes.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
And I'm not trying to be like Chestertown's Historic Preservation Commission, which is always saying no. I take a more
I've
practical.
never been to one of their meetings.
I
so
take a
don't
much
know.
more practical approach to, listen, buildings sometime have to come down, but it makes me very nervous when the county is doing demolition by neglect. I mean, I think that I do take an issue with that, and it's not necessarily, it's not any one person's fault. And, and I want to, I'm not trying to point the finger at anybody, but I think that this is something that we can all work towards. But, if we can't go out and get an architect, I mean, Max, you are an architect, but, who would you, if we were gonna see if we can get a quotes from a builder of some sort, I mean, who would you recommend? You
Or
work
an
in Maryland.
engineer.
Who?
Yeah, I would think first off, you'd want to look at the structure. And maybe I don't know if we could re-engage the same engineer that did the original assessment, and just have them update the assessment to see if there's been much change.
So
That'll give us a
Bill told me
starting
we don't have time for that.
Right, but I think what you're discussing is what commissioners are looking for. What are our options? Not to do any of them, but to sort of lay out, we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do
It's
this.
just, it's hard for us to be able to, in my view, the right way of doing this is having a preservation architect and a structural engineer
Yeah.
do an assessment. I mean, that's the right way to do it, in terms of that. Yeah.
Make that
Well, it's the most appropriate way to do
recommendations.
it.
That, now, in terms of, do you have the ability to just go out and hire somebody, or do you have to put it out to bid?
We would have to put it out to bid unless we had someone who was a standing vendor. And I don't believe we have architects as standing vendors. Mike Molds is the only person I imagine who might have design professionals that way. Mike, do you have any?
Gary Gradell's the one that did the initial assessment,
Okay,
and we would
Is-
typically have to go out and get quotes.
Yeah,
from,
is there-
different-
It isn't really a sole source issue, so we would
Right.
have to go out and bid something that's not.
Is there a maximum number that you can use to do that where you don't have to do an RFP?
$500, and
is
then
it really? Good
goes
heavens.
to
Even
well,
at
then
night.
they go to 5,000 that you can get 3 quotes, and then 25,000 has to be approved by the commissioners through a bidding. You have to advertise it and do all that kind of stuff. So we'd have to get an idea of how much it was going to cost. I can't recall offhand how much it cost when Barry did it the first time. I think it was under 20,000, but obviously that was years ago. So.
But we
Yeah,
would still
it-
have to get money approved to get it done, so it's not being done in the 30-day window regardless, because there's no
Right.
funds to do this.
I mean, we're
How long
halfway
do
through
we
the
have
30 days.
before we get back to the commissioners?
So I'm thinking, I mean, the meeting that Jen and Max came to, and you submitted a letter, was March 14th. So The middle of March would be, I think the 19th is the next meeting, so I certainly can put an item on it. I think the idea would be is just that this body would choose a representative or representatives to come to the meeting and sort of summarize what you talked about as options and sort of let the commissioners know, hey, as a board representing professional historic preservation, these are the options we think you have, and have some sort of rough idea, again, of like what a first year of expenses might look like. I really think that's in the window of possibility. And, you know, I think the reason that demolition and a structure to memorialize was brought up is because that was one of the options that didn't get any discussion at all last time. So I think the idea was that was just kind of the missing piece, right?
Okay.
And it looks like, Biz, it looks like the date is Tuesday, the 18th.
Oh, not that
Thanks,
I,
Tom.
sorry.
No, I was just making sure if I.
Yeah, no, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jen.
I think I have meetings that day already. This is killing me.
And I think they would be open to you prioritizing and really lobbying for what you would like, what you think should be done. I mean, some of them I felt may have had their minds made up before that meeting, and then they seemed very open to, like, I think they defer to experts. I mean, so.
I mean, I know the commissioners personally, and, you know, Albert Nixon and I go to sit next to each other in church on Sunday, so, this is Kent County, but, and I haven't talked to him about this, for the record, but,
That's good.
but,
I'm checking for the time, so April 19th.
is it 19th or 18th?
18th, April 18th is a 6 PM meeting, so it's a night
Oh,
meeting.
great, oh, that is,
Yep.
is that a,
Perfect. I
is
can
that,
do it.
is that the third Tuesday? Or is that's the third Tuesday, it's a fire company, but I might be able to just tell them.
No, thanks for getting the 18th there, Jen. Yeah, I'm on their calendar looking.
So 6
April 18th
PM.
at 6 PM is their
Yeah, the
meeting.
18th.
Okay, I can make that.
Jeremy, I think the commissioners are also gonna wanna know what the ongoing costs might be for, keeping this building.
Sure, absolutely. But I mean, what does everyone think about the two grants that I suggested, more or less immediate? The MHT preservation, the capital grant program, and Bardish True through National Trust. Those,
Bardish True will award till August, though. That takes a long time. And they want matching funds.
sure. Well, I mean, both of them want matching funds, right?
And it's
Yeah,
not
but-
necessarily cash for cash anymore, so it's any combination.
Yep.
So it's not like ask for 100, you have to have 100 cash. It's a combination.
Right. Bardish True allows,
Is it 25%?
yeah, they allow in-kind expenses. So if the Public Works Department does any work out there, or,
So question about the grants and about as far as which ones would be most prevalent. We know we have deadlines of May 1st and was it June?
June
for-
15th.
June 15th, but that also requires approval and support letters and all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
which cannot be done overnight. Do we also need the county's approval to even do those grants?
You
So
would.
we haven't had this conversation.
You would need the
even
county's
get that grant
approval.
ready by a May 1st deadline, and then to still get all the support letters and the things that we need.
Would be incredibly tight.
It's been done, but
But again, if the county is on a tight time schedule, that may work to the benefit. I don't know. But now National Trust, we could reapply. Typically, they have an October the 1st. Biz, it's October the 1st, right? Their next grant.
It has been, yeah.
Yeah, so typically they have an October the 1st deadline, because they do 3 times a year. And I do know, having spoken with Renee, who's the vice president of National Trust, they're having difficulty actually finding applicants. So I think that we might be able to, I'm pretty confident.
trying, because
Yeah.
if not, we're waiting a whole year.
Yeah, we are.
Is that gonna be Secretary of the Interior Standards?
They do require Secretary of the Interior standards. However,
Does that mean like old growth pine and stuff?
no, that's
That's
not the
not the
case.
standard.
That's not the
Okay.
case, no.
I'm
So,
just asking,
no,
so-
no, absolutely. And that's a good question, and we can be there to discuss what that means. You know, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation allow the repurpose of a historic building like this. I mean, not that the county would do this, but if the county wanted to put in bathrooms or something like that, or put an office in this building, I mean, that would be a permitted use under rehabilitation standards. They're not gonna allow you to put vinyl siding over top of it, you know? And they're not gonna allow you to, you know, to replace those wood windows with vinyl windows. But,
There
I-
would be an easement.
yes. To be frank, I think every single one of these would require an easement.
You know,
The-
we could, couldn't we take, I'm just thinking if we can take an easement on it, and then it would.
It would
not-
mitigate it?
Yes.
Well, I
boy,
think,
that
I
might
think
be
that that's what they allow. Isn't that right, Biz? I mean, you would know because you used to work with National Trust directly, but
I do all the time. Yeah, if we were to.
as the county, to,
If the building, as a county, if the county were to, I have to think about this. If we were to, if the
'Cause we're a
building were to
CLG.
become designated, yeah. If it was designated under the Historic Preservation Commission in the county, that would suffice, in place of an easement. So they would know that, they just want to know the building's being protected,
yes,
and that there's oversight.
yes. Now, an easement, as a general rule, does prohibit demolition, but I will also be upfront and tell you that MHT, and Biz, you may remember this, how many years ago was it that MHT permitted, what were those, was it the Ward, one of the Ward
Yeah, Ward
houses?
Brothers,
The
Big
Ward
Bluff.
Brother houses in Chrisfield
And your
had an
town.
easement, and MHT signed off on it. I blew my mind. I was like,
they sure did.
so
Hey,
it
Barter's
does,
true, next deadline is June 15.
yes, I put that in my letter, June 15th.
Okay, yes, yeah,
And,
sorry.
you know, I'm familiar with national, I mean, I've applied and obtained funding for National Trust before. I know their grant staff very well. I have not applied and obtained funding for the Preservation Capital Grant Program before, so I haven't. Biz, have you done that before?
Not for national.
That's for
Don't
Maryland,
recall
that's for MHT. That's their,
Oh, wait.
I don't know that I have. I don't
Have
know
you
that
done
it
that?
was
MHT we do,
actually
yeah,
in
several.
place.
for the capital grant program?
We're about to do it right now for May 1st.
Oh, are you? Oh, for Coleman?
Tucker House.
For Tucker House, okay. Do you think it's reasonable for us to be able to do for this? Do you think we have enough
It's
time?
extremely doable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I recall, they offer a planning option and then a capital option for this
They
grant
do.
program.
You have capital and non-capital. So
Yep.
this one in particular is the capital piece. If we wanted the non-capital, the deadline was already passed. That
Ah, okay.
was in April. So this
That
is
was in
capital,
April.
which is. the
Capital
actual-
only.
Yeah, it has to be the structural. So we could maximize this for the coming year if we utilize one of these to get all the feasibilities and
Yeah.
engineering studies and all done.
Yep, that's a great idea.
I don't know who's the grant administrator at MHT now? Because I don't work in Maryland, I work in
They've
Delaware.
changed over recently, so I know Andrew is who we deal with inside.
Andrew,
Trying to think of his last name.
I haven't worked in Maryland in 7 years, so.
I can't think of his last name just for the record, but his first name is Andrew, and they've changed staff considerably, like either easement staff is different and everything is different right now.
Yeah, I didn't when I went on their website, looked at staff, I was like, ooh, I don't recognize half of them. I guess I think that, yeah,
Is the administrator.
Say
What-
that again, Biz?
I think it's Barbara Fisher, isn't it?
okay,
Capital Grant Administrator for MHT.
okay.
I believe that's who it is. Does that ring a bell, Jen? That's what I'm seeing.
We have our assigned person is Andrew, so that's who I've been dealing with for some time.
Okay.
But I'm sure you're correct.
Well, let me ask this question, because I don't want to violate FOIA for us, because we are a commission, in terms of what's the ability, if one or two of us, along with the county staff, were to do a Zoom call with MHT to go over the feasibility of applying for their grant, you know, that's not gonna, are you okay with that, not violating FOIA?
Well, Open Meetings Act, I think if you do not have a quorum,
You're good.
okay.
I just want to verify, I don't want to get us in trouble, but,
And Gail opens, because everything we apply for runs through stories to help make sure that all the grants
really?
that go back to MHT are up to par. They help us out with language and.
Gail does,
certain
okay.
things, So we can include her as well.
I
Okay.
can certainly check with council to make sure that that's.
yeah, yeah. I don't want to get us in trouble, obviously, if we
No,
have
no,
it.
no trouble.
And I think, Penny, would you be on that call?
That's what I was saying, I would, you know, if you would be open to it, and even if we do the work, or most, a lot,
That works for me.
okay.
You know, this
have
is
to
an
work.
emergency stabilization. I'm also wondering if there aren't some emergency stabilization grants available somewhere.
I'm not aware of any, but,
We're in the process of doing a huge look for everything to do with some of our restoration projects, so if I find anything
Yeah.
we can utilize it.
you know, you know,
I don't
You can
know.
also check Department of Agriculture.
yeah, unfortunately, the National Park Service for their battlefield protection program, I did confirm that we are eligible for planning grants for that, but that deadline, already went March the 15th. I talked to the National Park Service staff.
I've got a weird question for you.
Yeah,
So since we're on a waterway, are we eligible for transportation grants?
no, this is not you mean through MDOT or something?
Mm-hmm.
No, no.
Transportation, they have some really weird grants. They have a lot of money. They do some really interesting things, and
There
for
used
those
to,
of us
there used to be state funding, under, when it was Ice-T, back in the 90s and early 2000s. I know, they used to have funding for conservation along byways where you could purchase easements. Because actually, I remember in Port Deposit, we actually put an easement on the historic Mount Ararat farm utilizing like $1 million of Ice-T funds. But that went away in the last two transportation bills ago. I can't remember. I think that was 2010 or something like that. That funding went away. I mean, has Gail weighed in on this at all?
I haven't spoke to her.
Okay.
Since our meeting.
I don't know either.
So if we're going to have a Zoom meeting with MHT, maybe we just use that as an opportunity to pick her brain as well in terms of, she gets an like, they used to offer sub-grants for projects,
They do in small amounts. So
like
they-
up to 5,000 or something like that, right? They still do that? Yep.
That heritage areas do that, yes.
Yeah, okay. So if, I think that could potentially, if we could get I don't know what her deadlines are, or if she has the ability to do it on a rolling basis, but maybe if we could get $5,000 and that can be used as a match towards an architectural feasibility study or something like that, for,
I believe that the grants are competitive. I believe there's sort of, catchment times, and then there's groups of them
Yeah.
evaluated.
sure,
That's generally how it's done, but I don't know what
what the deadline is and
I
everything. so-
haven't heard of one recently. There was one last year, like late fall, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe really early.
Because she used to do it, it used to be in the spring, if I recall. It used to be in like March, April, May, it used to be the application period. But again, I haven't worked in Maryland in so long, I haven't worked in Maryland 7 years, so I don't know what her schedule is now.
I'm emailing her.
Okay. But I think those two grants that I just discussed, MHT and Bardish True, those are our immediate ones that I think we should be requesting to the commissioners. And then my follow-up would be is if we could get Gail to apply for, and I think we should be doing this anyway, putting the granary aside. I think that we should be applying for a Paul Brune grant. It's specifically made for rural communities and for the revitalization of rural communities. So I think that it's generally applied for by a regional entity or a state entity. And I think Gail's office would be a perfect one to do it. But I think the long-term rehabilitation of this building could be covered under a sub-grant from that. If Gail were to apply for that this fall, this time, the fall of next year, we could potentially get $50,000 or $100,000 that can be used towards the rehabilitation of the building. But that would be step 2 or 3, but
They're in the middle of a, American road designation process. There's a lot going on.
I did a Paul Brune grant application. It took me about 40 to 50 hours to do it. By federal grant standards, I've seen worse. Those 60 to 80 page USDA grants that just the bane of my existence that I've had to do in the past, but,
They're terrible.
But, you know, I think in terms of if we can get as immediate, those two grant applications to do feasibility study with the expectation that, you know, if we're able to get a capital grant through MHT that would cover at least, you know, provide some funding towards, you know, the stabilization of the building, that, you know, if we can stabilize the building, you know, with a county match, and the county would have to come up with a match, but, you know, that's what,
I think having some ballpark figure that you can discuss about what that match could look like, I think would be important.
yeah, and Max, what are your thoughts in terms of providing a ballpark figure? I mean, that's where I get nervous.
That's really hard to put out there. You're talking about for the repair of the building, or just simply making sure it doesn't fall down anymore?
You know, the basic stabilization of the building so that it doesn't collapse. So roof siding, joist.
Covering up open areas of siding, you're probably in the $100,000 to $200,000 range.
So,
I think that would be helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, I mean,
Okay.
it's budget time.
yeah,
That's really
so,
what this is
so
about.
Max is an architect and he deals with this, so I think
Good.
I trust his judgment in terms of, the feasibility study, that if we hire one, may come back with a different number, but that's a number that we can
Because-
provide.
You really have to know what the structure is like underneath.
Sure,
When you start,
for the foundation and everything.
Well, when you start peeling away the exterior framework, you're going to find things that you might not expect.
Okay,
Well, it is unfinished inside, which is helpful. I mean, it's not like we've got plaster issues or, you know, it's
Right.
it's fairly well exposed.
well, Max, do you think it would be helpful for you, because for you to go through, to go inside the building, or is that nuts? To at least to be able to look at some of the exposed stuff?
I wouldn't go on a
I
weekend.
wouldn't mind doing that, just to see what its current condition is.
That, if you do that before the meeting, that might, I think that's, because it's gonna have to be done, so,
Right.
You're gonna wanna arrange that through Mike so you can get in, because it is secured now.
Secured.
Right, okay.
and, you know, my schedule's difficult during the day, so it, you know,
I may be able to join you, Max.
Okay,
let me know and I'll see what I can do.
And I'll plan to schedule an item on April 18th at 6 PM.
6 PM. Okay,
Are you guys reporting back?
okay.
Biz, while you're there, can you go ahead and take updated photographs internally? Interior? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then, would you be able to ask the county leadership in terms of, so that we have a ballpark idea in terms of what the program open space funding that you have in the pot, just that could potentially be utilized, or,
I can ask, I mean, I think my understanding of program open space is every year you have to make an ask, right?
well, you get an allocation, if I recall. I think,
I'll
I
talk to the Parks
believe.
Director, I don't, that's, you know.
Yeah,
That's
my understanding was that you have the ability to ask, to make an ask, but I thought we get some sort of allocation.
Okay.
Um,
I don't know the answer, so I'm certain,
Yeah.
I do know who to ask.
That's good. All right, well, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Do we need to do anything in order to put this report together that's public-centric before the 18th as a commission?
So
Because if we have to get back together.
right, I mean, I certainly leave that to your all's discretion. I think that, you know, my understanding is the commissioners are looking for you all to meet, come up with options, and then present those to them. If you want to meet again, we can certainly arrange that for you, if you feel you need to, but I think, from what I've heard, I think that's, you have the, you know, you're gonna follow up on
Okay.
specific things, you're gonna inspect the structure, then you're gonna come back together and report out on sort of what you've learned.
Okay,
If you feel you need to meet before that, we can certainly do that. It's a pretty tight timeframe, but.
sure,
we can
because
try.
you have
Sure.
7 day,
Very tight.
it's gotta be advertised 7 days ahead of time,
It
right?
doesn't have to be advertised 7 days, we can do it less than that.
Oh, okay.
And I was
Okay.
asking for the purpose of if we have to meet to make sure we don't violate any open meeting
Yeah, obviously,
Right,
yeah.
if you
guidelines.
meet as a full group, we'll have to absolutely have that be an open meeting, but, Open Meeting Act says reasonable timeframe, so,
Oh, okay.
as
I
long
didn't
as
know
we
what our
have a
input was.
public agenda up online, I think 24 hours is like
Oh.
the very minimum, we would be okay. So,
Okay.
we like to send things out on Fridays, because people expect to look for them, but we don't have to.
Sure,
right?
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, obviously
So
don't
if
want
you all want to do something, let me know, and we can schedule something for you. And if you feel like, you're, once you go out to this site and you've had a look, et cetera, that you're
Okay.
good, then you can just go to the meeting for the commissioners. And again, I think, and Mike, you were there too, I mean, I just think they're looking for what are our options and sort of roughly ballparkish, what is that gonna look like cost-wise?
Okay.
I really, that's,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
the issue was if we gotten a price just to stabilize what the I-beams in there, and that was a little over $20,000. So that begs the question in terms of those I-beams have been in since 2010. And we got a quote from KRM just to get an idea what the cost was. So we're dealing with just that, just to keep the second floor from caving in on the first floor. Because the problem from the original study was that the first floor, termite damage and wood rot, that basically the second floor is pancaking onto the first floor. And with the rotting of the supports for the I-beams, now those I-beams are actually being held up by what's left of the first floor walls.
The exterior wood is starting to rot that's supporting the I-beams? Is that the issue?
Yeah, the
Cribbing?
cribbing, that's the word I was looking for, yes. There's several other places the cribbing has just gotten rotted away that the I-beam isn't even sitting on it.
Yeah.
Did you have benefit of the copy of the Gary's study that was done?
The
But
one that was
one
done in
shared.
2009?
I think it's in the packet, Mike.
Yes.
It's in the
yes.
packet.
Okay, you have that. We have contracted with Gary Gradell to do design for replacing the Betterton Beach Boardwalk. So
Okay.
I know he's busy, but
Sure.
I've be working with him on that project and see if he was interested in looking back at this one.
Could we ask for what the cost, if he were to update the structural assessment, could we get that? Could
Sure.
could we ask for a
I would-
quote?
Yeah.
That way we know what that cost is when we go into the commissioners meeting. I think that would be worthwhile getting if we have the ability to do that. And if he's already been out there, it may be a reasonable cost because he's not starting completely from scratch.
Right. There's definitely some economies there.
Yeah, so,
Biz, I verified something for sitting here. The letter of intent for the May 1st deadline has already passed, so we'd have to talk to MHT about the viability of even using the MHT grant this year at all.
Okay.
It's something we already applied for. It just dawned on me that that was already due well over 60 days ago. And the May
Yeah, I bet
1st is an extension by MHT to all of us in the community. It was actually due a month ago, and they extended it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
and that's once a year. That grant's once a year, right?
Those-
So,
I remember that email now.
okay.
Just so we're not running towards a deadline that we're not going to.
I think it's maybe
Right.
worth just having a conversation with them anyway,
Yeah.
just so that they have some,
Depending on how many grants they've had submitted or their potential to, it's worth the question.
Mhm.
So,
It's always worth asking, right?
absolutely.
yeah.
Can we go over what we have so far?
Please, that would be
Okay,
great.
What Bill just also mentioned. So we have checking on open spaces. We have a call in to Gail for Stories of the Chesapeake for the small grant, in case that's in a position to help us with any of these assessment costs.
Yes.
On-site meeting with Max, Biz, Who else was going to be included in that? Mike
Just let me know.
And Mike?
I may be able to make it, but I doubt
and
it.
Jeremy possibly. And Biz is also going to update some photographs for us inside the interior. We're responsible for the recommendations, and our deadline is April 18th at the 6 PM meeting, but prior to. What is the deadline for us to have something submitted to the commissioners in advance?
The Wednesday before the meeting.
Okay, it's a day before.
So
I think
let me
that's
just,
gonna be this,
What day is that?
I think
Oh,
that's
the 12th, not the 18th, okay.
April 12th, okay,
My deadline
Next
to
week.
submit is noon on April 12th. I have the information.
noon. All right. I mean,
I think you can present it live if you want to.
sure. I mean, to be frank, I mean, we could just tweak what I've already submitted and just, we can redline in terms of this is passed. That's a deadline. It's once a year. I can verify some of the things. So we'll get
And then
budgeted.
the grants was the last item that we have so far.
What's, I'm sorry?
The grant was the last item of those list of things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things we have to work on. The grant was the last item. The grant list, which you already have here, we'll just update.
Yeah, update grant list. And I will call Nikki Van who's the grants manager at National Trust, and I'll ask her if she has any other. To my knowledge, I believe Bardish Tree would be the only one they offer, but,
And if I have anything else that I can add to our list, I'll work on that
mhm.
in the next 3 or 4 business days.
And this, what I'm about to say, this was not asked, not part of the
Sure.
discussion when you were there for discussion. But I'm just thinking that, as part of this discussion, if any member, I think if you have experience with a building at this kind of condition, this stage, talking about sort of what that was like, might be helpful if you do, right? Because it is sort of an unusual situation, right? I mean, most
Well-
buildings aren't at this level of,
I was in a building
Danger.
I was in this building,
Yeah,
I was in a
no
building
worries.
this morning. And I'll tell you, it's at the Four Corners in Smyrna, and it's crumbling underneath your feet. So,
again, that wasn't asked, it's not a requirement.
Sure.
But I'm just thinking to help the conversation, if you all can say,
Yeah.
hey, when we did this project back in 2010, and it was like this, and kind of how did
Yeah.
that work out? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's, I've certainly seen worse,
I made up that date, Biz.
Every
certainly,
building under those circumstances is different.
yeah.
Yes. What, the message though is that it can be done if the will is there to do it. It can be done. I mean, it just takes money and will.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, is there any, the other thing that keeps popping in my mind, you guys may say no, it is in a critical area. I mean, it's right on the water.
Yep, it's in the buffer.
Yeah,
That works against us, Biff, Biz.
Yeah, yeah,
As long as we're working within the footprint.
Yeah, as long as you're working, I mean, it's impervious surface, so it's not like we would be doing anything of that nature, but,
no, I'm wondering if there's funding. I'm thinking about funding, conservation, public access. Is that all open space?
yeah, you're not gonna, we can ask MHT. I remember I got an MHT grant years ago through FEMA that, to be able to do assessments on buildings within the 100-year flood zone. Remember, we did that in Talbot County, but
In general, a critical area wants you to take buildings out of the.
that's the big thing.
Right.
And actually, that's something that I think needs to be said made clear for the county's perspective, that would, if you take that building down and don't replace it, state law says that if you don't replace it within a certain amount of time, that you can't, your ability to put that building or put another structure back, I can't,
That's
because I haven't worked in Maryland, but I do I can't remember if it's 12 or 24 months. I believe state law says that if you take a building that's within the 200-foot buffer, that I don't know if you can replace it.
Well, I'm not our subject matter expert on the critical area, but I can say two things. I would be very surprised if this weren't, quote, modified buffer, right? The buffer's been reduced because it's a functional
Yeah.
place,
Probably is.
one. And then two, when you're a government entity, not all things apply exactly the same way, right? There are public purposes, it is a public landing. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm saying it isn't,
Yeah.
it isn't the same as, a private property that, You know, it does not involve public access and, you know, a landing that's 400 years old and all the other parts here. So it might be kind of a special case.
I have a lot of wounds from having dealt with some of these individuals. To be frank, I mean, even though it's on the public record, some of them are the closest thing to communism in this country. Some of them trying to deal with the Critical Area Commission. They're,
It's not good.
no, they are not easy to deal with. I've
Protecting a valuable state interest.
yeah.
Well, you guys, I think just lastly, I want to say that it's been my experience too that, you know, we can go in front of the commissioners and we can make the case for, look, you know, counties invested significant funds into this building already. You know, it's an important resource. Here's the, you know, et cetera and so forth. And we can stabilize it and we have grants and that can all be done. And then they're going to look at us and say, and what are you going to do with it so that we're not having this conversation again 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. And we're going to need to have something up our sleeve to say, look, you know, it can be this or it can be that. So whatever that zoning allows is going to be important. And what can it be used for? I mean, I remember having conversations in 2010 about, oh, we can make it a snack bar. We can make it an education center. We can make it, who's going to pay for the utilities? Who's going to man it? Can it be leased out so it generates revenue for the county? Can it be leased out to like any of the local nonprofit organizations from the, you know, or the Chesapeake Conservancy? What do they need? You know, what can it be? That is, you know, we can fix it, but it has to be sustainable and it needs to have a purpose. And that's sexy. If you can't tell them what you're going to do with it, that's not sexy. They're not gonna have a hard time get behind that.
Yeah, they'll just think it's going to come around again.
Yeah, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, it's as good as done. It's got no use. Nobody cares. Nobody can use it. It's an immovable object that's just a problem. So we need to be thinking, and we're going to be talking again about how we're going to position the building for use. What can it be? I mean,
It has to have a lot. That's what it is.
yeah,
Has
it's
to
got to
have-
have a job. Every building has to have a job, or it doesn't have a purpose.
Right. Or it falls in.
Yeah, it falls in. So I would encourage everyone to be thinking about that. Like whatever you think, whatever comes to mind, it might seem like an out of bounds idea, whatever you come up with, but you know, just think about it, and we may come up with something kind of pretty interesting. I don't know what the needs are down there besides parking, but Jeremy, you might have some idea, or Jen. I mean, who are the
There's
groups
some
that are going to need this? Sultana.
There are some
Does
on the
Sultana
table.
have need?
I have a question for everybody, because this is happening someplace else in the county right now, too. For the county purpose, the commission is responsible for recommendations. Let's say everybody says yes to everything. It's a beautiful day and we're ready to start on things. Who's responsible for all of that? Because the commission is not.
And when you say all of that, you mean like
If all the yeses are
managing a
said
construction
to,
project?
yeah, and I understand that Mike is our public works, does it then become his project? Because the commission doesn't have an ownership
County
in
property.
the long-term assessment, the building, the project, the everything.
So Mike's on the line. I think traditionally, Mike, doesn't the Parks Department and the Public Works Department share responsibilities for things that are happening in this kind of location?
Programmatic stuff is through the Parks Department.
Okay,
All the buildings are under Public Works.
okay.
So this would fall in Jill's hands, and she's not part of this conversation right now.
For the programmatic aspect, not the building.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm asking about the building.
Commission. Well, if we locally designate this building under our commission, then whoever does end up handling it has to come before us to deal with approval of any plans and to work with us on putting a plan together. So it may be that in the funding that we get, we hire a manager to take care of this.
Okay,
We may have a consultant who takes care of the execution of the project, and a different organization who does, a workshop on use. You know, Stories of the Chesapeake could be really good for that. Does that answer your question? I mean, does that
yeah,
sound?
in part, I'm thinking of what the commissioners might ask if we say we've got all these recommendations, and then once we lay the table, the report down, where does it go from there, and whose shoulders does it fall on to go to the end of the project, if it's to be fully restored, for example, so.
That would have to be assigned.
Yep. It could be a consultant, it could be an architect, it could be.
I mean, you could have you could just do,
Project manager.
yeah, you could have a project manager who, whether that's a Becker Morgan or somebody like that, or, you know,
I think we gotta get someone who's sensitive to this, though. Becker Morgan's awfully big.
no, I'm just using that as an example, like we're going through construction of a library, that's who, you know, we're using for that, but.
They're great, those guys, by the way. I really
200, they also cost $270 an hour, because I signed those
Yeah, I know.
invoices.
I know. They do, but they are good. But yeah, I think I think we can handle that, Jen. I think the bigger question is, number one, can we designate a county building under the county commission? Is that,
Well, the county
Is that-
commissioners would have to approve that, wouldn't they? If it was
Yeah.
a county, because they're the property owner.
As property owners,
Yep.
yeah, that would
The,
make sense.
the county commissioners would have to sign off on us putting an easement on the building. So, I mean, I think that's a discussion to have with them,
it would be a historic district overlay zone. Yeah,
you know, for,
Yep.
and whether or not it would just include the granary, or, because the county owns, about 100 acres? Is
I
that
don't know.
correct?
I don't
I
know.
believe the county has about 100 acres.
It's right next to some state acreage, so it's a big piece.
And speaking of that, is there a site plan that's relatively accurate about this property?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Survey.
I can ask.
It should have been one in the packet from the first go around, right?
No,
I didn't see it.
yeah.
Drawing and-
Stu Barrel.
When you ask for a site plan, do you mean of the entire property or just where the granary's located?
Mostly where the surrounding area of the granary, I mean, it's a big property, right?
Right.
That's what I'm saying, I think it's about 120 acres.
I believe there is. I think Shelley showed me something like that recently, when they were looking at, it was another,
The county, this was one of the first program open space acquisitions that was done, my understanding. Stu Barrel's uncle was the one who sold it to the county.
Wow.
It might have been done when the park was created.
Yeah, I mean, it was his family's property, and it came with half a dozen buildings on it.
Right.
You know, it came with Knox Folly, it came with the farmhouse there at the Farm Museum, it came with the Latham House. And what was that house, what was that house that was there by the county pavilion? There used to be a house
yeah,
there.
that ended up in Baltimore, I
It
think.
ended up in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a village that they sold to the county, which was a gold mine. I mean, it's an outstanding park.
All right, I don't know about you guys, but I'm gonna have to sign off here soon. Do we have our next steps in place? What else do we need
Yeah,
to
I mean,
do?
I can redraft a working document that I can send out sometime next week or something like that, and you guys can mark it up or something.
Are we gonna have to meet on site before the 12th? Is that?
Yeah, you're probably gonna have to.
So,
I can.
so again, you all had asked, when would you have to have written materials in? It would be noon on April 12th, but I don't think you need to have written materials in. I think you could, submit them live at the meeting as well, right? Everyone understands it's a 30-day turnaround, it's
Yeah.
pretty tight. So
And-
if you want it in the packet so that, it gets posted before the meeting, we can certainly do that, there's no problem. But I think you can also, you showed up with the letter at the meeting date. I think that's, in this case, because there's such a tight turnaround, I don't think that would be an issue. They're really looking for a report back, right, reporting out.
Yeah,
And
I
you'll
want
do
to,
that personally, so.
I do want to be cognizant of their time as well, so I want to give them the ability to be able to do their homework. So
Absolutely.
I would like us to shoot for doing that for the April 12th, out of fairness to the commissioners.
That's not a lot of room. That's not a lot of room.
Well, I already have a draft document. So,
All right. We can
So-
make a run at it.
and again, I think 2 pages, like, 2 pages, I don't think it's a summary with a,
One quick question, assuming the building can get rehabbed, the county would allow someone to lease it if they had a business opportunity?
I heard somebody mention that at the last meeting, so.
Yes, and there have been people who've inquired, so.
I mean,
So
you,
we'd have to meet program open space standards, because there's program open space invested in the building, right?
Mhm.
Which I think we're
Who's-
struggling with right now with other uses, right? Is that right, Mike?
So it has to be a specific use?
I think it has to be recreation related. I'm not an expert, but that was discussed at actually the next item on the agenda after you all, was the limitations on some of the program open space leases. So just,
so I-
making you aware that there could be some limitations.
sure, there are some, because I've dealt with it from the state, for the state properties, that they have a program called the Resident Curatorship Program. And they allow limited commercial uses on their leases, which essentially, this is just the county version of the same thing.
Right.
So, I think, we're not gonna be putting a casino in there, obviously, or,
Yeah.
and, I don't think that a snack bar or something that we necessarily, but like, the gentleman was talking about doing kayak rentals or something like that, or environmental education. I mean, and that was already done on his property. I mean, Wayne Gilchrist did that, which was, a nonprofit doing something like that. So I think, that's already been, and quite frankly, the county did it. Granted, that was decades ago. They did the same thing with the Farm Museum, which, has that expired? Has that lease expired?
Farm museum.
The
is
issue
still
we
out there.
had with, the issue we had was that the Kent Museum was leasing out the land for farming use,
Oh,
and they wouldn't allow that. And we actually ran into the same problem with Toll Park.
okay.
Where some of the vacant land, we were farming it. You can't do that. It has to be recreational use.
How does the state get around that? Because they do the same thing, because Alan Ligger, I don't know who tills the 900 acre piece, but Alan Ligger was tilling it, but, so,
Well, they are both grantor and grantee, right? So.
yeah, they are. But, okay, I mean, I think, I feel pretty confident in terms of what we need to do. I think we already have a framework.
Alrighty. Do you still feel you need to meet with Gail, or is that window sort of closed for that grant?
I think it's worth, since she's kind of the middle person, I think we should meet with her.
There's two things in place. One, we can ask her the questions, even before we
Yeah.
ask MHT in case she's an advocate. But the other is the $5,000 grant, and that's what I've emailed her about. So we can ask her both
Yes.
about the small grant and the
Yeah.
MHT process.
So you've already reached out to her?
Yes.
Good.
Yep,
Okay.
and
I'd
then,
like to get it started.
Yeah.
so I think that's well worth it.
Okay.
Well done.
Yes.
Alrighty. Thank you all very much.
I have one non-related to the Granary question. Did the Joneses apply for, because I'm in the fire company, they applied for a burn permit for a brick farmhouse on their property in Massey?
They go through the health department?
For a burn permit, you do, the health department does issue a permit.
Right, but it's a historic brick
Demolition.
house. I was just curious if they applied.
I don't-
If it's like it is in Queen Anne's, it doesn't go through.
But demolition permit, you have to approve a demolition,
Demolition permit goes through us, yes.
so.
Yes.
But I can ask. I don't,
Okay.
I don't review them personally. I can
Oh,
certainly
sure, no,
ask
no,
the
no.
team. Yeah.
It is the roof is gone in the house, but it is, I just want to, if we could go out there, and one of us go out there and take photographs and everything, that would be nice. I don't know when the house was built, 1820 or 1830 or something, but it's that one there almost across from Alexander's. And it came up this past week that we got a burn permit. Fire company's gonna be
We
burning
should,
it down.
we should have review on that demolition before it's approved.
Biz, if it works like it does in our neighboring county, it does not work that way. So we'd have to maybe ask about that little caveat, that the burns do not go through any planning and zoning.
Yeah, 'cause
They're not considered demos, they're considered controlled burns typically, and they
Okay.
don't go through the same process. So it'd be good to ask.
Yeah, 'cause Jones already actually,
Let's ask.
they had a white farmhouse almost next to Wenger's feed mill, the first farm on the right, that they burnt down. A friend of mine lived in that house. So it's, I didn't know if we had pictures, but, it would be kinda nice to get photographs. We can do that.
I'll look
Sorry
at
to
it and see.
lengthen the meeting.
Oh, that's fine. I'm happy to
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
That's right. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Are we good?
Motion to adjourn?
I
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting approved. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you for joining us, Mike.